Alright, this should be a fairly short video, but this is something that I kind of wanted to touch on. Mostly for the guys that are potentially renting ground out, or, you know, potential landlords. And kind of something that make you leery of for the guys that are looking to rent ground. So 2 weeks ago, for anybody that's been keeping track, that day that I went over and spread fertilizer on the wheat ground, I had gone and looked at a patch of ground that I was hoping to possibly rent. The quick backstory: my buddy Evan, the guy initially offered it to him. Actually, Evan was second in line. The guy initially offered it to this farm right here. This would be a farm called Jess Wine, or their name's Jess Wine. He offered it to him, and they turned it down because it was small, patchy, and they said if they let them take this fence line out and this fence line out, they'd be willing to farm it, but they don't want to mess with it because they can't easily get their stuff into it. So they turned it down. Then he offered it to Evan. Evan turned it down for the same reason, and then Evan offered it to me. When he offered it to Evan, he told him it was 60 acres tillable. And then when Evan told me about it, he sent me the plat book overlay of it. So I got online, got an NRCS web soil survey, and did a boundary to figure out how many acres was there. And no matter what way I did it, no matter how generous I was making boundaries going into the tree lines, I could not get anywhere close to 60 acres. The most I ever got out of it was about 45. So that was my first red flag. But I was like, okay, maybe there's more to it than that I don't know. You guys need to go out. You stay home. You going out, Wigglebutt? No? Okay. So, okay, well then it took me almost 3 days to get a hold of the guy, because the first time I called him, his phone went straight to voicemail. The second time I called and left a message, and he never called me back. And then I waited 2 more days, called him, and finally got a hold of him. And that was when I got the time set up to go talk to him. Went out there and talked to him, and this field is probably 7-ish miles from here, so it's not super duper far, but it's not super duper close either. Finally got out there to talk to him, and immediately I started not getting a warm, fuzzy feeling about it, just by the way the guy acted, I guess. So I knew my first red flag was, he said, okay, so there's these 3 chunks that are outlined with a boundary, and then there's this hockey stick shaped piece that's up along the road. This piece here, there's a driveway here, there's this piece here. This piece here is dang near unfarmable. I mean, you can farm it, but you're probably not going to grow anything on it, because several years ago, a pipeline came through and it cut right through the front part of this property. And when they cut it through, like most other pipeline ground I've ever seen around here, now right over top of this pipeline, basically this is all low ground right here, it just floods. The drainage is all sorts of screwed up, so you might as well count this complete section out. And then the nicest ground in the whole farm, because it's got the least amount of trees around it, is this hockey stick shaped piece right here. Well, first red flag, where I should have just said I don't think we should be doing business together. He already rented out this entire front piece to this farm because they want to pasture it for their cattle, because they got Angus show cattle and all sorts of fancy high-end cows. So they got a 5-year lease on this hockey stick for pasture. It's like, okay, so there's still all this ground back here. Well, then he tells me, I don't know if I want you farming this piece right here, because I want to put sweet corn out there for the grandkids, so if the grandkids can have something to sell out at the road to make some money. So we probably won't have you farming that piece. It's like, okay. Then he's like, we get over into this field and we start walking around, and there's this patch of trees and a patch of trees here. This right here this is all low ground, and basically at the base of this patch of trees right here, this all turns into a big-ass hill. So there's a very steep grade that starts in a very short amount of time. So this hill right here, he says, we probably don't want you farming that because we're planning on building a house this year and we just don't want anything growing on it. So just don't plan on farming that. So I was like, okay. So then we start driving around, and there's this very narrow dog leg that comes through here. This might be 200 feet wide. It's not very wide, with trees on both sides. Then it opens up a little bit, and then it opens up into this big piece, which is probably the best part of or best ground in the whole field, because this is all like dead level flat, really nice ground. If that tree line was gone, it would be really nice. So there's this field, and then there's this little 3-acre piece right here that this little part of the hockey stick is a big hill, and then this all tapers down into kind of a valley back here. So this is all, you got high ground here, and you're a hill here, and you're a hill here, or you're going downhill here, you're going downhill here. So there's this piece, and then there's actually, I had my boss make this a map for me, so that if I ended up going back and talking to the guy, it's like say, hey, here's how many acres you got. And then there's this little crescent moon shaped piece right here that I didn't have him put a boundary on, because I flat out told the guy, I was like, I'm not even going to bother farming that because nothing's going to grow on it. So he drives me around, shows me everything, and the other red flag that he threw up almost immediately, aside from saying, okay, well, this is already rented out, and we don't want you farming that, we don't want you farming that. And he says, when he's talking, he's saying we a lot, like we can do this and we can do that. And I really want to say, hold on here, buddy. This is not a sharecropping situation. There is no we. You provide the ground, and I pay you for me to farm it. There is no we here. This is a me thing. If you want to do stuff out here, that's fine, but there is no we. So we get back up front, and this ground, I had high hopes that it might be some nice kind of prairie type soil, because that's what all this is. This is like a big open, like quarter section right here. And this is all nice prairie dirt that opens up, and there's another patch of trees here, and then there's a great big open valley right over here, and that's all nice black prairie dirt. So I was kind of hoping this would be similar. Yeah, nah. This is all like blow sand, really, really sandy, with rocks, like softball size and bigger rocks. And mind you, this field has been no-tilled for like the last 10-15 years, and there's still, you can just see them laying on top of the ground like rocks. So I'm not saying it's gonna be poor soil, because it kind of reminded me of my little field I got down south of the state line here, that it's very similar soil type, and that ground down there is really rocky, but it grows really good. So I mean, it has potential, but just looking at it, it looked like a poor soil. And driving around out there, the guy that farmed this lived all the way up in Dowagiac, and to get to this field from Dowagiac with a piece of farm equipment, I bet you're looking at easily a 2-hour drive. Easily. Maybe more than that, because there is no good way to get to there from here. So I think this was one of those fields, and he was farming it because he was friends with the guy's father-in-law. But I think this was one of those fields that he was farming, and it just kind of was a thing. And I don't think it was being taken care of properly, and I'd be willing to bet if you pulled a soil test on there, this field has all sorts of problems. So, and the other thing that was kind of a red flag, actually, there were so many red flags. So while we're out here driving around, I mean, you see this is all little chunks in a big patch of woods. So my first question to him while we're out there driving around looking at it's like, so what's, you got much deer pressure out here? He says, oh yeah, we got some deer. He says, this year during hunting season, we took off 17 deer. And he says, in the last 2 years, we've taken close to 40 off of it. And he said, we haven't even put a dent in the population. So I was like, oh, it's kind of what I expected, you know, because it's a bunch of little patches, and I figured, okay, deer pressure is probably going to be the biggest limiting factor out here no matter what you did. Like, okay, there's that. And then the other red flag, same thing while we're driving around. is there was beans on this field last year, and I'm guessing that they, judging by the swath width, they must have cut that with somewhere in the neighborhood of a 25-ish foot head. So if they were good, healthy beans, there should have been a really nice, heavy, you know, tailings trail where the combine was running. And there was like no tailings trail. There was like hardly any stubble. It was just a really anemic looking residue. So I don't think the beans out there were that great previously. And that could be chalked up to two things. It could be chalked up to the fact that the deer pressure out there is nuts and they just got ate off. Or it could be chalked up to the soil is just in very poor condition from not being properly taken care of, because it's just kind of out on the fringe of the guy's range. So it was just kind of there existing. Or a combination of the two. It hasn't been taken very good care of, and the deer pressure is off the charts. So we get done with all that, and we get back up front, and I'm standing there talking to him. He's like, so what do you think? There's probably still at least about 50 acres left out there, isn't there? I'm like, no. And I told him, I said, I went out, or after Evan offered me, or told me about this, I pulled it up, and I made a satellite map of it, and I said the most I ever got out of it's 45 acres. And that was the other thing, is while we were out driving around, he said the previous guy farming it had only been paying him for 47 acres, and he thought he was getting gypped. And I was like, I'm pretty sure he was actually getting paid for a couple more acres than what was actually there. Now, when the guy started farming it, it might have been 47 acres, but by the time if any of them fence lines have grown in at all, there's enough tree line there that it doesn't take a whole lot of growth to start losing acres really fast if you don't keep up on keeping trees cut back. So this guy kept thinking that there was a lot more acres out here than there actually was. And with this piece, and this piece, if he let me farm this piece, because he was up in the air about it, that's only 29 acres. So there's nowhere close to 50. There's nowhere close to 60. Even if you had this, there's nowhere close to 50 or 60 acres. But the guy kept insisting that there was all this ground out there, and that the previous farmer wasn't paying him for all the acres that were out there, and yada yada yada. And I was like, okay, well, if we continue this conversation, I'll bring a map out and show you what I got. I don't think he believed. I think he thought that I was trying to cheat him, and I was being I don't know. So we came down to sorry, this is all video looking at a map, but this is my visual aid. So we get through all this, and we're back up front, and I'm just not, between his attitude of thinking that he's got a lot more here than what he actually is, which if you're going to be a landlord and you don't know what you have, there's no shame in coming forward and saying, look, I don't know how many acres are out here. If you figure it out, we'll come to terms on it once we get it figured out. But don't act like you have all this ground, or don't act like you have all these acres and then you don't, and then somebody tries to tell you you don't have all these acres and then you don't want to believe them. It's just, and if you're that worried about it, get your own survey done to figure out how many acres you got before you even enter talks with somebody, so that you know that everybody's on the level. So anyhow, we're back up front, and I'm like, so what do you got to have out of it? He says, well, make me an offer. I was like, well, what was the last guy paying you? Because I don't want to start too low. And he pulls a cigarette out and he lights it, and he goes, oh, you're not getting it for what he was paying me. And I said, I didn't figure on it, but I want to know what he was paying you so I know where to start. He says, the last guy was paying me $80 an acre. I was like, shit. Because from what I saw of the soil type and the fact that it's all buried back in these trees and all the deer pressure he was saying that it was out there, and the fact that the stubble looked like either the deer had ate it all off or the soil's in poor condition, or both, 80-85 was where I wanted to start on it. So reluctantly, I offered him 100, and he him-hawed, and he said, well, I'll have to go ask my wife. And that would have been on a Thursday. And he said, okay, well, we got a starting number. I'll go talk to my wife about it, and I'll get back with you Sunday. So that would have been 2 weeks ago as of this past Easter Sunday. Would have been 2 weeks prior to Easter Sunday. He said he was going to get back to me. So it's been pushing 2.5 weeks now, and I still have yet to hear from him. And at this point, if he does ever call me back, I'm probably going to turn it down just because the way he was acting, I do not. And the other thing was, he wanted a 3-year contract, which was fine. I'd prefer a multi-year contract because it makes life easier for me because I know that I have it at least for this amount of years. But the part that scared me was when he said, I want to sign you to at least a 3-year contract. That way you can't say next year you don't want to farm it if something goes wrong. And I was like, well, that's a red flag because, hold on. So I was like, okay, that's a really big red flag because let's just say the deer are that bad out here. If I plant 30 acres of beans out here and they mow off the entire 30 acres in the span of a season and I make no money off of this, I sure as heck ain't going to put corn out there next season and lose my ass on corn. So I obviously didn't say any of that. That was what the first thought that popped into my head was, if this turns out to be that big of a shit show, I do not want to be locked into this guy's thinking I'm going to farm it at a loss for 3 years because reasons. And I made that very clear to him when I made it in my offer. I said, I'm going to have to price this based on the fact that you tell me that there are all these deer out here and I am probably going to suffer a pretty good chunk of crop loss because of these deer. Which he just kind of seemed to slough off and didn't think that he didn't seem to think that that was a very serious problem, which was another red flag. So, like I say, if the guy does call me back, as much as I'd love to have 30 more acres, especially 30 acres of Indiana dirt, because I got a feeling if you got this ground back where it belonged, it would probably be some pretty productive ground minus the deer pressure. As much as I'd like to have 30 more acres, this guy just did not give me a warm, fuzzy feeling about doing business with him at all. I feel like this guy would be just a never-ending pain in my rear end. So, like I say, as much as I'd like to have 30 acres in one spot like that, well, one spot, one, broke up. But anyway, you get the idea. I think if he does call back, which I'm assuming that means that since he hasn't called me back in 2 weeks, that they think that somebody's going to come in and give him $150 an acre for it. Which, if it was a nice big 40-acre square with no trees and very little deer pressure and good prairie dirt, it'd be worth $150 an acre. With a bunch of chopped up little not square deer pressure, poor soil, rocky soil mess like this, it was not $100 an acre ground, but I offered him $100 an acre because he said he wouldn't take 80. So anyhow, this was not meant to be a rant. This was meant to be more of a this is what I view as red flags, and maybe it'll help another guy out that is negotiating and sees some red flags. And maybe if there's people out there that are looking to rent some ground out to somebody, this might help them approach it from a more respectful and educated direction than, I have 60 acres and I want all this money for it, and you don't have 60 acres and it's not worth prime farm ground rent. So sorry it's a boring video, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch on that point a little bit because it kind of, I'm not gonna say it irked me. It irked me a little bit. Like, if you're wasting my time. Oh, and then there's this little square right here that's probably like 1.5 acres. He says, yeah, don't farm that. He's got asparagus planted in there. And then he said, well, if you don't want this, I got a guy that wants to plant some hay. So I was like, okay, so now you're going to have 3 renters out here on one chunk of ground. It's like, oh my God, this is going to be a nightmare. So sometimes, no matter as hard as it is to find ground, sometimes you just have to say no and walk away. As hard as that is, especially when you're my size and you're hungry for ground, it's just, sometimes it just ain't worth it. So anyhow, that's what I needed to say about that. So that's it for this one. We'll catch you guys on the next one.